Hello and welcome back to iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on social media at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. This week on Breaking Ground, I chat to Jonathan Reinhardt of Jonathan Reinhardt Design Labs. Jonathan, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much.
So Jonathan Reinhardt Design Labs, what does that entail?
So Jonathan Reinhardt Design Labs, I suppose it's an umbrella for a number of startups that I've launched with some friends and some colleagues over the last number of years, and that's the umbrella that they all fall under, and just somewhere to start our ideas from and then launch them to the market.
Very good. So talk to us about it, because I've seen your name quite a lot on the BIM side and digital construction. So essentially digital design feeding into construction. So tell us what are you by qualification, or what are you by trade?
So my background and my qualification is I'm a chartered architectural technologist. So some people often ask, are you an architect? I'm not an architect, I'm an architectural technologist. And the key difference is that I'm more technically trained. It's less about the architectural art and history and appreciation and stuff like that, which is obviously as important. But I'm probably more technically trained in terms of building compliance, building regulations, a lot of stuff that people may find boring, but extremely excites me. And then things like sustainability and energy consumption and energy use as well. And part of that is something called BIM, which you may know me from as well, Carol.
Very good. And I think it's important to kind of get the context right, because there's been so much happening along the construction technology side. It's quite an exciting time. And in fact, even in the past month, we've finally seen some action on the digital build project for Ireland. So there's quite a lot happening. And I asked this question whether I'd guess from Ireland or outside of Ireland, but where does the design and construction industries for the built environment in Ireland, where they sit in terms of tech adoption? Are we far ahead? Are we far behind? Are we middle of the road?
I suppose the context I'd put it in is, we've so many tech companies in Ireland, and I think, by influence, we're an extremely tech orientated country, and that there's a huge motivation just in the mindset that I see, even in the architectural, in the construction sector, that I see on a day-to-day basis. That techie mindset is really out there, whether you're a high level executive in a company, whether you're in a financial department. There's a huge technological awareness within industry, within all industries within Ireland. And I feel that feeds into the industry that I'm most focused on, such as architecture and construction. So there's a huge appetite out there for it. And I suppose in terms of where we actually are in progress, we've come a long way from what I've known in the last 10 years. And I suppose what I usually use as my benchmark, and my background being in building information modeling, being part of what I do, which is BIM implementation, I've seen huge construction companies. Construction was probably one of the least technologically used industries within Ireland, from what I've seen anyway, and even globally as well. But we've seen huge construction companies now adopt this type of technology. As part of some of my roles during the week, I support these type of companies adopting new technology. And how advanced these people are on site, using mobile phones, using iPads and tablets. When you see that in the guise of supply chain and subcontractors on site using this type of technology, I think it says a huge amount about where Ireland is in terms of technology adoption and where we are as an industry as well.
That's really positive to hear. But is it true, or is it the case that maybe the gap between those companies that are embracing it and those that aren't, is that gap just getting bigger? Because essentially what we've seen, the latest figures for adoption rates of BIM, and I haven't seen any over the last 12 months, but prior to that, they were still really low. And I think when you're in a cycle or an ecosystem that's innovative, you're only ever dealing with the companies who've embraced and that have embraced innovation, where it's actually, we know that that's not true across the board. So, I mean, is it a case that we're dealing with an ever widening gap between those who are doing it well and maybe those who aren't? And will they, in terms of any gap that does exist, I mean, is there an opportunity for the companies that haven't started to really catch up at this stage?
Massively so, and a very good point you make there. So roughly in Ireland, there's about 600 architectural firms, and that's made up of, and there's about 3,000 architects or registered architects in Ireland that make up part of those 600 firms. A large proportion, I don't have the number at hand right now, but a large proportion of those firms, 60-70% say, are either micro to medium size. So that's from a one person practice, architectural practice, right up to 10 or 15 size architectural practices. And in my opinion and experience, those people are generally less likely to adopt BIM or new technologies as fast. And that purely comes down to available capital, a cost increase in terms of skill level needed for those particular staff. And it's actually something I'm extremely passionate about on the BIM side, but as well on some of my other businesses as well. So you make a very valid point, and it's probably what we're seeing, in terms of adoption is probably with those larger firms at the top, kind of as if they're representing everybody, but they're not necessarily. And I think there is a huge opportunity and a gap at I suppose, educating and passing knowledge, either from the public level or, putting supports in place for micro and medium and smaller architectural firms primarily to be able to adopt technology, because I've worked in these firms, and I know, it's tight. You're getting money in on a weekly basis just to pay the wages at the end of the month, and that's how any small or micro company works, regardless of sector, really. And I do think there are more supports needed, definitely for those micro kind of businesses, one man show, five person practice. I think they need to be represented a lot more in terms of driving technology adoption in their business. I certainly don't think it necessarily falls on their shoulders in terms of entire responsibility.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really fair point. I suppose I'm watching as well what's happening in the UK, and we saw that, for example, BIM being mandated on PPP projects for the last number of years, and there was it was almost assumed that Ireland would follow suit, and we haven't, and we still have, really onerous procurement practices for the private sector dealing with the public sector, and I know that that's being addressed right now, but it's a long time overdue. Even if it's fixed today, that has caused problems over the last number of years. What more should the state be doing to support the smaller outfits that you mentioned there, to help them embrace technology, actually, so that we can move the entire sector along?
Very good question. And I think in relation to what you mentioned about the Build Digital project, I think, and I've been following that very closely myself, and kind of recent announcement from that, I think that's will play a huge part in it. And, it's only getting started. And I think, the investment that has been put into that so far, it's a huge statement to show that this sort of, knowledge is going to be shared by public institutes or academic institutes. And I think that's a huge start anyway. It's about sharing knowledge and getting that information to the smaller practices. And, if it means giving them grants or giving them more funding, I'm aware that Enterprise Ireland have a certain BIM enable and BIM grants available as well. But I think more needs to be done in terms of whether it's free training or low cost training for these smaller firms. Because if a person is out of an office for a half a day or a full day, that's a day that they're not earning or working on paid work. And that's extremely important for small businesses. So I think that balance needs to be struck and supported by government, whether through grants or whether through free training programs to help upskill that side of the industry.
Yeah, and jumping from kind of one trend to another, even though obviously they're very closely linked. Today, I really want to talk to you about sustainability, because I know that you're launching a platform that I think might shed some light. Sustainability across the sector, there's still a lot of confusion. And actually, I saw in the Sunday Business Post, or the Business Post, there a couple of weeks ago, there was a really good article by Avril Clare, recruiter, talking about how established professionals can retrain essentially for a career in sustainability. But do you think there's a good understanding of the principles of sustainability across the sectors?
I think it's mixed across sectors. So as from a personal perspective, I'm extremely passionate about, improving our climate, because, there's no doubt that we're having an impact on the climate, and we need to do something to change it. So from a personal perspective, I'm extremely green and be as eco as I can be. But what I do notice, and just in at a general level, there can be companies who jump onto this sustainability buzzword and maybe use it to drive marketing or drive certain PR. And I think what I feel, there needs to be some accountability if you're going to do that. So if you're going to promise something, this is sustainable, or there needs to be some sort of KPI, or you need to be somehow publicly accountable, by going back in 12 months or looking back in 12 months or 18 months and saying, you said you were going to do this, this is what you perceived yourself to be, and this is how you're interpreted in the market. What have you done about it? So I think it's mixed across the industry. I myself, I suppose, I graduated 2008, 2009, so quite a bad time in the industry. And what I do have to say about the government at that time, the amount of courses available for unemployed people in green technologies, in green construction, in passive house design, I went on almost every course that there was available. I even went to Germany for a 2-week course, for a passive house course, funded by the European Union. So, 10 years ago, there were people out there that were extremely knowledgeable. And what I see with anything that's talked about long enough, so if it's for 10 years, and I usually put that number on almost everything, if something is talked about for that long, it then eventually reaches itself into the industry. So what I see in construction itself, and on site and in construction and construction environment, I am seeing that these workers are becoming far more aware of the reason why they're using certain materials, or the reason why they're using certain design methods, such as air tightness, which wasn't a thing over 10 years ago. Air tightness in a building is becoming extremely important. So I've definitely seen that filter through into tradespeople, for example, down through the industry from maybe from an academic level, and then feeding through into the industry. So the construction industry and the architectural industry, I find, is extremely well geared and well skilled towards what is sustainability. And I suppose I don't necessarily represent other sectors or those sectors, but I suppose, in my opinion, architecture and construction are extremely well ready, and if they use those terms, sustainability, they know what they're talking about, in my experience.
Okay, and this week, something you posted actually on social media caught my eye. You put out a call for sustainability companies and experts, because you're launching a new platform, Greenup.ie. So tell us about Greenup.
So basically, Greenup has spawned from previous innovations that we've launched, something called Arkley.ie, where we connect architects and homeowners in online consultation. And the whole kind of concept behind this, is my own passion for both sustainability and both for construction and architecture as well. So with Greenup.ie, what we actually want to do is we want to connect homeowners with sustainability consultants. So for example, you're thinking about installing solar panels on your roof, and you want to speak to an expert for an hour, or get some sort of advice. You can come on to Greenup.ie. What I should say, we're still in beta kind of closed mode, but what we're working on, you can come on to Greenup.ie and you can choose your preferred consultant based on their skill level, perhaps the category. Is it solar panels you're looking to have installed? And you can book a consultation with them for either a small fee, or if there's more involved in it, the fee may be higher. So the key to this is that it's all done online as much as possible, because people upgrading their homes, it's quite a lot of money. And especially with all the government grants and what's available now, is extremely motivating. So people want to get on that sustainability ladder, we'll call it, and they want to make some impact at home. So what we want to do at Greenup is kind of keep that cost down, so that it's an entirely online engagement. If somebody needs to go out and visit the property, of course, that's possible. But I suppose we can also do a lot with photographs, with information from the client, and we gather all of that on behalf of the consultant, and then we organise that initial consultation between the homeowner and the sustainability consultant, depending what their expertise is.
Very good. Trust is such a huge factor for something like this. How are you vetting your providers?
Well, I suppose I'm lucky enough to be working in the construction architectural industry for since 2005 now. So I've quite a good network of companies I'm very familiar with, and I've worked with across architectural projects. But as well as that, we check everything from qualifications to insurances to professional registration as well. We ensure that these consultants are, at the top of their field, or at least registered with the relevant bodies. And I think Ireland being such a small country, it's relatively easy enough for us to do our due diligence on that side as well.
Yeah, but again, we're at a very busy time for the industry, and I just saw there in terms of the national retrofit scheme, such a small number of people, contractors and all, had actually signed up for that. I think the number at last reading was something like 19, and they expected to have 75 at this stage or more. So in terms of numbers, are there companies out there that actually have capacity and are out looking for work now?
There definitely are. I suppose the industry is extremely busy. I mean, if you try to get a builder in the last 12 months, I mean, you're waiting another 6 or 12 months at least. So they probably see less of a need in the industry in order to go after these retrofits. But what I am seeing, and from speaking to people I know in the industry, companies are in the background. They are upskilling themselves. They are getting themselves ready, because at the same time, if the government is putting so much money to it, that area of retrofit becomes a lot more resilient to any potential kind of economic repercussions that could potentially happen over the next number of years. So in the background, I do see that skill being increased, but it may not happen for the next 6 or 9 months perhaps before we actually see that come to be available to the consumer within the industry.
And Jonathan, one of the things, we talk a lot about ESG, and one of the things that I'm just so aware of is that, ESG was supposed to be about more than the environmental. We don't seem to be touching on the governance and the societal issues as much as we are, and the environmental. And obviously there are many reasons for that. But do you think that we're doing the right things, as opposed to trying to do things right? The targets that the government have set, do you think that they're ambitious enough for what needs to be delivered?
I do think the government needs to be doing more, and I don't need to be ragging on the government. Very, very supportive of any sort of movements towards sustainability in Ireland, and I do have to commend the government on that. But I do always think more can be done as well. I don't think we're doing enough on climate, full stop. I see certain rollbacks of policies last week in relation to climate reduction in Ireland as well, by bringing back certain industries, and I appreciate maybe that needs to be done, but we still need to get real about climate. It is a threat to civilization, and I think that just needs to be accepted and kind of drilled home a bit deeper. It's not that we want to be scaremongering or anything like that, but I think it needs to be taken a bit more serious by the general public, and I think it's the government's role to make that happen.
In one way, I think that actually the consumer is taking this in some ways more seriously than industry is. So up until really the last 2 to 3 years, I would have said that sustainability initiatives were absolutely seen as an add-on or an expense, not as really a social imperative or a benefit. But actually, we're seeing that change in real estate. We're seeing that actually sustainability metrics must be hit before funding will be advanced. And actually, it's how people are winning tenants into their schemes and things like that. So actually, suddenly, when you put the commercial imperative there, it becomes a different conversation. But that's, I suppose, on the real estate side, on the management and asset management side. On construction, are we there yet? Or are the professionals still looking at this as an expense that must be borne?
There's no doubt that it is an expense, and it can affect margin, which we know. The construction company has to make profit, and construction companies work on very low margin, in my opinion, when you compare it to other industries. And any expense is it's quite a considerable encroachment on that kind of margin that they're working to. And yes, it is seen as an expense, but I understand why it's seen as an expense. it can be a significant burden to carry. If it's an option, is the client willing to pay for it is the key thing, or the person funding the construction project or building project, are they willing to fund it as well? And what I've seen, if the client is willing to do it, then the contractor and the construction industry is willing to go with that as well. So unfortunately, it does come down to money as well in a lot of cases, and I think that is something we need to work through, certainly, and just commit to the longer term plan of 5 or 10 years or further, and make sure we're sticking to it.
Absolutely. Well, look, you're obviously playing your part by actually connecting those in the know with people who need to know. Actually, is this in a way, does it work on the same model as your current business, Arkley?
It's a very similar business model. It really is. Arkley is focused on architectural or architecturally, where it comes from, and then Greenup is focused on sustainability. But it's not just, I mean, we have consultants up there that will focus on sustainability approach to interior design, the types of materials, even the types of paint that you could use that are more eco-friendly, or things like permaculture as well. So growing your own food at home, or growing your own herbs and shrubs. We also have those type of experts. It's not just strictly the construction sector. We want to be a lot more holistic, and kind of help people, not just if they're renovating their home, for example, even if they're just doing some work in the garden, or want to improve their any sort of element at home, collecting water, or storing that type of water. What type of water can they collect? And we kind of just want to break down the knowledge barriers based on that.
Are you seeing any innovation coming through? Have any companies or innovators, providers stepped forward with ideas maybe that you hadn't come across?
We've seen some pretty exciting stuff as well, which we hope to be able to show you once we fully launch Greenup and from our providers as well. But all very exciting stuff happening out there in the industry as well. And I think even in the startup sector in Ireland and even further afield, climate change is a huge thing. If you look at venture capitalism, or venture capitalists, they're really looking to invest in companies that are having an impact on climate change. And I think that in itself, when you see Silicon Valley making that step and that leap forward, I mean, that says a huge direction about where we're going. So I definitely take that point of view.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, we've seen a lot of the prop tech that's been funded are ones that actually feed into helping portfolio owners hit their ESG targets. But actually, it's really interesting to see this whole new offshoot of climate tech independently. And it doesn't surprise me that there's huge crossover between climate tech and prop tech. Similarly, it doesn't surprise me that when you're in the business of connecting designers with homeowners, that actually the next natural fit would be to connect them for their sustainability needs. So actually, in a way, it's almost like the hallmark of success is where we don't distinguish anymore. That actually sustainability is part of every service we procure. So actually, as part of a design consultation, that there would be a sustainability consultation coming into that. Are you starting to see that?
We're starting to see it a lot more, and from homeowners. Every homeowner that I've dealt with, even in my previous past, and in designing projects, working on architectural projects, if it's a home extension, a one-off house, or whatever it is, homeowners are actually asking for this first off. They'll tell you, I want an air-to-water heat pump, I want geothermal heating. They'll tell you that in their initial brief. What I do find happens, though, is just the initial investment or capital needed for that is kind of the cost of your kitchen, perhaps. And it can kind of come out or go on a longer term plan, perhaps. So the motivation is definitely out there. Sometimes it just comes down to the economics and financials, unfortunately, of budget on a project.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I won't even get into how the grant structure is set up, that actually those who need it most are least in a position to avail of them. But that's not your responsibility. You're taking care of your side of it. So that's it from Breaking Ground on iProperty Radio for this week. My thanks to Jonathan Reinhardt of Jonathan Reinhardt Design Labs. You can get in touch with the show on social media at iProperty Radio or by emailing hello@iPropertyRadio.com. My thanks to Hear Me Roar media team and to Luke Delaney on sound for Dublin South FM. Until next time, thank you for listening.